Okay. Oh yeah. Okay. We can turn you on there, Sherry. Oh yeah. Sherry's just reminding everyone that it's so helpful to keep a journal of your sourdough experiences. Yeah, we're just getting ready for the second segment of the evening. Can you believe how much fun we've already had? I know the smell in the kitchen here is, I wish you could all experience it, but maybe you can imagine it. It's like, it's the smell of childhood. It's the smell of fresh bread. It's such a beautiful thing. Yeah, we're very excited for our second segment today. We have Derek Fleming, master herbalist, here to teach us a time-honored recipe from, I believe this originates in Eastern Europe. Yeah, we're gonna get the full download on Kvas, and this is this is the bread beer. This is very different than the Kvas that we make here at Light Cellar in the fridge. Is the beet Kvas? This is actually the bread Kvas. So yeah, I think in Slavic languages, Kvas just means sour, but we're gonna have a we're gonna have a super interesting segment here on how to turn bread and into something delicious. Yes, better than kombucha. It always fascinates me how herbalism, the worlds of herbalism and nutrition, they are inseparable. When you're talking about bread and you're talking about grains, you know, you're talking about a medicinal substance. Every single plant you see could be considered a medicinal herb, and grains are no different. They, when you enjoy them in a wholesome way, they're going to have some tremendous healing benefits. So it seems like every herbalist I know has become fascinated by fermentation techniques, teaming up with microbes. Yeah. Yeah, there's no way to separate herbalism and foodism or being a human in general. Okay, that we're just doing our little transition here, but yeah, welcome to the 9th day of Calgary Fermentation Festival. We've got a very fun night today, all centered around grains and bread. So we just had Sherry Litchfield give us one of the most in-depth sourdough bread making courses ever. Next up, master herbalist Derek Fleming. He's going to be teaching us how to make like a delicious effervescent beverage from your stale bread. This is a way to use ingredients that potentially might just go to the compost. Instead, you can ferment it into a delicious, healthy beverage. So it's super fun. Yeah, we're just getting set up here for segment number 2 of the night. Hold on to your horses.
Bread beer. When I think about that, I bet you there's gonna be some questions. Well, what's the alcohol percentage? It's beer, right? But that's coming. Yeah, and more. That's right. Yeah, I was taking a look at this and I asked Derek. I was like, "What is that? Is that like coffee or what that is?" And he says it's bread tea. But that's what we're gonna get into. So I see cane sugar, I see raisins, I see a little starter. Yeah, I see some stale bread. Oh, hops, eh? Wow. Okay, so yeah, this is really gonna be a beer, complete with hops and everything.
Just for you?
Just for me. All right. Hopping up.
Oh, I need one more thing. Sorry.
Yeah, no, totally. All right. And then again, this was also a recipe that's part of your package. If you didn't receive it, I'll make sure I email that again out tomorrow. So everyone's got that, including the video from tonight that'll be posted, and last night's, which is posted, but I haven't sent you the link just yet. All right. Oh, look at those. All right, we are gonna have fun. Yes. Nice. This is the thing I love about hanging out with fermenteurs, right? It's just like they've got fridges and coolers and pantries and everything full of all these incredible different fermented delights. It's like, whoa, what is that? And what is that? And what is that? And let me have a taste of that. And let's try this.
Adventure every time.
So yeah, no audio.
So just
Yeah, just as you are. Okay, cool. So Derek does have, so it's going to be a live presentation. He's going to be bringing in his screen with a little bit of PowerPoint at times as well. So yeah, this is going to be great. Nice and dynamic. And Derek is always the best. I mean, unbelievable the amount of time and research he puts into his
no
presentations.
pressure. No pressure.
Yeah, no pressure. Only because I know, having seen Derek speak and present so many times here at Light Cellar over the years, it's always, top notch, above and beyond, very well researched, and his recipes are always so well dialed in. And I know he lives this stuff too at home. He is the baker in his household, and yeah, this is one of the kind of offshoots that has come about from that passion, that hobby. So something that if you are inspired as maybe you've already into sourdough baking or you're going to start it now, this is something that you can then go ahead and take to the next level. But I recognize a few different styles of bread, things that, that's the magic mystery bread. Yeah. I have to admit, I have a certain style of sourdough that I do that I make all the time, like the flatbreads. Otherwise, we'll occasionally buy a good nice sourdough from places like Sidewalk Citizen. And yeah, if you ever end up with those kind of crusty ends, looks like this is going to be the perfect recipe for that. So yeah, totally. Yeah. It's totally up to you. Yeah, whatever makes you comfortable for navigating that computer while you're doing your PowerPoint. Okay, all right, so let me just turn to do that, turn the sound down while we get the mic on, and then we'll. All right, here he is, Mr. Derek Fleming. Many of you may know his brand, New Earth Organics. He's based out of Cochrane, Alberta. Yeah, does an incredible job he's got that golden touch, anything he touches.
Fire, baking fire.
Yeah.
So am I live here now?
You're live, you're
Okay,
on.
Good. Welcome everybody.
Yeah,
Thank you
we're
for
looking
joining us.
forward to this.
Now, I just want to make sure share screen is there. Okay, I think we'll kind of get rolling here, get into it, everybody. I'm going to look at the camera, look a little bit down. Kind of the plan for this evening, we're going to go over a PowerPoint presentation. Just because I think, especially when we talk about Kvas, most people think of beet Kvas right away. But as Denis was alluding to, we're gonna talk about the traditional form of Kvas. There's no right or wrong, just a little bit different. So I thought that I would back this up with a slideshow, just so we can walk people through, kind of get a good download of what Kvas is. We are, as you can see, going to do some hands-on here. I think I got everything. If I forget, I'll run and get something else. I think we're good to go. It's pretty straightforward, pretty easy. If you know me, maybe you do know this, maybe you don't. If you follow me on Instagram, social media, I love baking sourdough. We were talking before the class tonight, and I literally think that baking sourdough is better than eating sourdough. Now, I know that's hard to believe by looking at me, but I swear I love it more, baking it more than actually eating it. And when you're talking about Kvas and how we can use our bread or our stale leftover bread pieces, this is the best way ever to recycle up this used bread or this old bread, give it new life, give it new purpose, discover something unique and unusual. And really, it's a whole world. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I do have some Kvas out here. We're going to do some tasting at the end. But like I said, I want to walk through this first. So I just want to make sure I got my screen shared. I'm going to open this up here. Just give me 1 second. Oh, I think we can go like this. Now, am I sharing my screen now? Is that, can you tell? Yeah? Yeah, I'm just gonna go like this. Now, am I in the corner at all or no? Just my voice? I am? Okay, great, because I'm gonna probably talk with my hands. We're gonna go right to the beginning here. Okay, probiotic bread beer, the original fermented Kvas. So I know Malcolm sent out a recipe. We're going to go through a couple different variations on that recipe. The handout that you got, you can adjust the proportions and ratios going forward if I forget to say that. I'm going to go over some recipes, but basically the hands-on is really just to get the method down. We're going to define what Kvas is. Like I said, recipes, we're going to get into a little bit of science behind it. And I think if this is all good, we're going to jump in. So what I'd like to do first off is what is Kvas, right? So actually, let me just see here. I want to actually talk about this first. I'm just going to move this out of the way here. So some key points for our discussion tonight. When people think of Kvas, they think, like I said before, of beetroot Kvas. There's nothing bad or good or whatever between the two. They're just different forms of Kvas. So the difference being that bread Kvas uses no whey, no salt, doesn't use vegetables. Now, you can use other types of vegetables to make Kvas, but in our clique or our community, we mostly know beetroot Kvas. So we're going to be talking about the differences between the two, but I just want you to get your head out of the beetroot Kvas and into something totally unique and something totally different, and that's bread Kvas or bread beer. So I wanted to also point out is, yes, I will be discussing about gluten, wheat, and grains consumption in tonight's talk. So spoiler alert, we're going to get into it. So stay tuned. Now, I'm just going to go. So what is Kvas? Malcolm, is that showing up good for you on the screen? Perfect. Okay, so definition of Kvas. So like Malcolm was saying and Denis before, Kvas is a fermented drink, mostly known from Eastern Europe. It is especially popular in Russia, and it is made from bread. Now, often rye, it's low in alcohol, and it's sweetened. Yeah. Well, I got a trick for you, Malcolm. He's giving me the thumbs down for no alcohol. I got a trick for you. So it's another definition is a slightly alcoholic beverage, Eastern European, mixed from and fermented from a mix of cereal grains. Now, my definition of Kvas is it's a fizzy, slightly sweet, slightly acidic, slightly beer-like, low to non-alcoholic beverage, similar to kombucha, jun, or tibikos, also known as water kefir. Now, in its essence and essentially what Kvas, traditional Kvas is fermented bread tea. Now, I know this doesn't sound too appetizing, bread tea, but just stick with me. It will blow your mind. So if you don't have 2 pairs of socks on, you might want to double up because they're about to be blown off. So I went over this slide here. So some history about Kvas. So it's a common drink, Eastern Europe, from Russia. It's been around since the Middle Ages. I just need to minimize this. I think this will work if I... Okay, I think that's better. Now I can see my screen totally. Sorry about that. Been around since medieval times, 5th to late 15th century, and it really developed as a way to use up or recycle, like I said before, old stale sourdough bread. Now, any bread can be used. You'll find on the internet, they're often talking about rye only for Kvas. That is not true, and you can use any type of bread for Kvas. So as I mentioned before, it's non-alcoholic or a low alcohol content. It's typically about 0.5% to 1% alcohol, 1 to 2 proof. This is if you use a sourdough starter culture. So when you use brewer's yeast, so this is a shout out to Malcolm, when you use brewer's yeast, you can get the alcohol percentage up to about 8%. So it can be pretty heavy duty. I don't really drink much alcohol ever at all unless Malcolm has me over and starts feeding me some booze. But so for me, this low alcoholic drink is fantastic. I get a beer-like taste, a beer-like flavor. I can brew it slightly, tiny bit sweet if I want to. all the rewards of drinking that traditional fermented ale, but without the alcohol content. Now, that is because I'm using a traditional starter culture. If you did want to use brewer's yeast, then you can produce alcohol from it. So really it's fermenter's choice and whatever works for you. I will say that the starter culture is going to give you a plethora of bacteria, yeast and bacteria, that you're not going to get from the brewer's yeast alone. So I do suggest using the starter culture. Now, Kvas is literally one of the most nourishing tonics you can consume. So if we think about drinking beer, we know that it's very filling, right? It's very sustaining. There's a lot of nutrients in it. Well, we get those same benefits with Kvas, but in a low alcohol format. Kvas is typically also low calorie, if that is of interest to you. So it's like a light, low calorie, low alcohol beer. So also very economical to make, but it's a nourishing tonic to get a lot of vitamins and minerals into the body. Now, this is an especially, in my opinion, an especially important skill for the sourdough baker to master. Because if you're a baker like me, you're going to have little bits of bread laying around, little ends in the freezer, and you can kind of keep those and put them, in a bag in the freezer, save them up, and start brewing Kvas at your leisure. So it's a wonderful way to recycle that bread. But also what I find, and more important, or a more important aspect of this, is it's a wonderful way how you can consume your sourdough starter, your culture of bacteria that you've been taking care of and nurturing, in a raw, unbaked, uncooked format. So when we bake the bread, there's a little bit of debate online. There's a little bit of research behind this. Some of the lactobacillus apparently does survive the oven. I don't know how much faith I put into that. There's differing of opinions. Again, it's going to be about temperature over time. But when you're consuming Kvas, you're taking this in a raw format, using this bacteria and creating something that's amazing. Now, I find sourdough starter, and I'm going to talk about this more going forward, is a very aggressive ferment. So when we compare it to our kombucha, our jun, those types of scobies, I find that the sourdough starter, the sourdough culture, or it is a SCOBY because it's a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast, is the most aggressive, most robust out of them all. It is hard to kill, easy to manage, and just amazing. And you can start it from literally flour and water. So you can start it at any time. Now, if you're not a sourdough baker, you might want to experiment and get into it, but you don't have to. You can do Kvas from store-bought breads. Sourdough is what I would recommend, obviously, but don't feel pressured that you need to be a baker to experiment and adventure with your Kvas brewing. Because really, if you have any sort of access to bread, you can just easily get some starter, manage it, and go from there. So don't feel overwhelmed that you need to be a baker to proceed. Now, the only thing about it when you're brewing it is you usually want to choose breads that have some sort of maltose content. There's specific grains, which I'll get into further, for the maltose content. But even if you have white bread, and I'll mention this later, which usually has a low maltose content, the yeast and bacteria work together that they split the starches up to create maltose. Now, maltose is just a double-bonded glucose molecule. So it's just another form of sugar. But when we think about brewing beer and ale, we want that malt flavor. Well, the maltose also feeds the lactic acid bacteria. So the lactobacillus bacteria do prefer the maltose, but really any type of bread is fine. Whatever you can get your hands onto, you just want to get a good quality starter. And we'll talk about that moving forward. See if I can, no, there we go. Okay. So now bread Kvas. So as I mentioned before, bread Kvas is literally a bread tea. Again, doesn't sound appetizing, but just stick with me, I promise. Now, bread is the base fermentation, flavor, and also food source for the yeast and bacteria. You can mix other herbs in there, lemon, mint, honey. You can make flavors, whatever comes to mind can be created. And then it's just mixed with a sweetener and a starter. So really easily. Now, the thing about it is it truly is, like most fermentations, an art of applied microbiology. So even though we're going to give you recipes, we're going to go a hands-on approach, specific ratios, things like that. It's really about experimenting and kind of learning what you like. It's an art form more than it is a science. And I can't stress that enough. And when I get into the hands-on, we're going to talk about the water proportions, how different bread acts and soaks up water. So it's really about that artistic flow. So it's being gentle and easy, and it is so almost foolproof. You're not going to have a bad result. Now you can create kvass from a wild fermentation, or sorry, using wild fermentation. You don't have to use a starter. You don't have to use brewer's yeast. So you can rely on wild fermentation to get all the yeast and bacteria that you need. However, it's going to be a lot slower. And when you use a starter, it's going to be a lot quicker, but it's going to standardize the probiotics, let's say the yeast and bacteria that you're going to get in the final ferment. So when we take our starter and we move it to a different environment, it's going to change slightly anyway. So this kind of gives it not only a standard probiotic, but you're also your surrounding environmental flair on that final brew. But again, if you want to go strictly wild ferment, you can. It's just going to take a lot longer and not be as fizzy, not be as potent. So I do recommend using the starter. Now, as I said before, it is a nourishing tonic, rich in metabolites, minerals, and enzymes. But I'm going to talk more about the bread ferment when I get into this section. So even though we're going to talk about bread and kvass tonight, I do want to talk about sourdough and the fermentation process a little bit. It's not the focus for this class, but when we ferment sourdough bread, we find an amazing thing happens. And Denis alluded this, I think it was on night one when you were making sauerkraut. You're talking about the vitamin C content in the kraut, right? Where does it come from? So start with a little bit of cabbage and you do have a slight vitamin C content, but by the end of that fermentation, you have a vast difference in your vitamin C content, right? So these bacteria and yeast actually excrete metabolites out into the matrix, right? They're consuming their food source and they're actually excreting compounds and they're transmuting other compounds to increase the nutrients. Now we find this in any sort of fermentation process happening. But when we talk about sourdough, there's literally an increase in hundreds and hundreds of different and distinct compounds. Now, when we specifically use whole grain rye into the ferment, there was one study I was reading, one paper, 711 different compounds increased. Like hundreds and hundreds, which is, again, why I'm a fan of using the starter, because this is a powerhouse. Now, the interesting thing is it's also decreasing a few hundred compounds. So things like everyone goes to the phytic acid right away, but there's a whole bunch of different other compounds in the grain that it's starting to reduce, creating new ones, reducing. It's really this dynamic ebb and flow. Now, wheat does the same, all grains do the same, but rye has this magic little touch to it where under studies show that the rye will increase it by vast amounts. So I always recommend people put, a small amount of rye, maybe a teaspoon, 5%, no more, or just to use a little bit of rye in your starter, but really there's no right or wrong approach to this. Now, these secondary metabolites that are created, like I said, are vast. Some of the most known or the highest levels are things like antioxidants, mineral content, organic acids, proteins, specifically branched chain amino acids or BCAAs. So if you know what BCAAs are, they're isoleucine, leucine, and valine, I believe, are the branched chain amino acids. That's what gets you jacked. If you want to get jacked, drink kvass. So people will take branched chain amino acids when they're lifting weights or bodybuilding because they're very anabolic. So kvass is known as this nourishing tonic, right? So if you want to get as strong as a member of the Olympic wrestling, Russia wrestling team, you want to drink some kvass because it's going to get you built. So this is important for anyone at any age, though, because as we age, our muscle mass decreases. So we want to get these branched chain amino acids in us. Now, when we ferment the bread in general, specifically also kvass, and I'll get into the secondary fermentation about that, we're going to get a large increase in these BCAAs. Another thing that's super fascinating, so we were talking about vitamin C before, but we also see up to a 7 times increase in the folate content, B9. So this is folate, not folic acid. So this is the 5-methyl tetrahydro real form of folic acid. So the real folate. So you're going to get the actual B9 that you want, that you're trying to get from food in super high levels. Now, the interesting thing is if you're using any sort of all-purpose flour or white flour here in basically Canada, there's some sort of rule about fortifying our flours all the time, they're going to put folic acid in here. Now, folic acid or synthetic B9, and not to get too far in a tangent, but it will actually bung up your HTMFR gene, which is your detoxification gene. So you don't want to bung that up. You want real B9, real food source folate. You want to get away from the folic acid. Now, the interesting thing with the ferment, because those flours are fortified, we're under the assumption that is actually turning that folic acid that's added in there into a food source. But this increase here, this 7 times increase in the sourdough fermentation, is a natural phenomena when you're actually in studies using a non-fortified flour. Something else that's interesting is when you're using rye, there's something known as the Rye Factor, which is kind of cool. So when you're using rye in your sourdough fermentation, there's actually a lowered insulin response. So it's actually making your insulin response better to the bread. So this is one reason rye is used. Now, rye is hard to bake with. The gluten is weaker. So what you can do, and I do have some bread that's 100% here, but even just a little bit of rye in there is going to help with the overall insulin response to that bread and to that sourdough fermentation. So here's some bacteria. Now, the interesting thing when we're talking again about the starter is it's never the same 2 days in a row, even in the same location. It's always changing, always evolving. So we have these bacteria listed down here, and there's many more. But really, this is just a guideline of the overall genera or the genus of bacteria that you're going to get in the final fermented product. You know, we have things like lactobacillus is going to be your main group of bacteria that's causing the fermentation of the sourdough. We have, you know, the streptococcus, the lactococcus, the yeast species. Now, we definitely have the Saccharomyces cerevisiae in there. But as you'll see, many in there. Now, if you were just using brewer's yeast, you would just be getting the Saccharomyces cerevisiae. So this is another reason. You definitely would get a higher alcohol content, but you're just going to get this Saccharomyces cerevisiae bacteria in there. You might get some rogue wild bacteria and yeast that are creating, but when we're adding the sourdough culture, we're getting that standardized approach to our ferment. Okay. Now, Kvas benefits. I wanted to keep track of time here. I'll go a little bit quicker through this because we definitely want to get to the hands-on approach. So the strong benefits of sourdough fermentation are undeniable, and we'll talk a little bit about that when we're doing the hands-on part again. But really, when you're using the starters, so you're using the sourdough bread that you've made, you're making a bread tea of it, you're adding starter to it, and you're starting a secondary fermentation process. When you're adding the starter for the second time, in my opinion, you're going to jack up those nutrients even more. It's just further enhancing it. So it's like a raw sourdough bread on steroids. And this is why it's become so popular as a nourishing tonic, but also a health tonic as well. So it's been one of the most popular beverages for centuries throughout Russia. They mostly know it for its digestive effects and boosting cellular metabolism. But it's also used to help prevent infections, keep the heart healthy, the whole circulatory system. A lot of these things here we're going to say are, I'll say they're anecdotal, even though there is some research behind it, but we're not here to make recommendations. Fermentation, Kvas brewing is a lifestyle, so we don't want to make any sort of claims on it. But it's really this invigorating tonic that's good for the whole gastrointestinal tract. It improves the digestion and assimilation, especially of heavy fatty foods. So you'll see it commonly used or drank in Russia after heavy meals, or Eastern Europe in general. But after heavy fatty meals, it's really good with those organic acids to help dissolve and digest that food. Like I mentioned before, it has a real positive benefit on the heart muscle and the cardiovascular system in general. Now, these yeasts in the actual fermentation, you know, and again, they're going to vary different, on different starters and different areas and environments. So no two starters are the same, but the yeasts that generally grow in the starter are known to help remove cholesterol plaques throughout the system, which is amazing, while also keeping our arterial system, so our arteries, nice and elastic and fluid, strengthening that system, which is really important. So they do recommend it actually for people with high blood pressure to drink Kvas. To each their own. We're not here to make recommendations, but that's an interesting side note or note on Kvas. So we find that it also has an antibacterial effect. Now, this is against harmful bacteria. We're going to talk a little bit more about that going forward. But this antibacterial effect where it's protecting and renewing your good probiotics, reducing the harmful bacteria in your system, in your intestines. So because of this effect, they've known it to help things like conditions like cold, sore throats, flus, harmful viruses. Hint, hint, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. You might want to consume this this day and age to keep your immune system healthy. Now, like I said before, enhances the production of insulin, really helps your sensitivity to insulin, but also helps with the overall production. So you're going to get less of that insulin hit, even though you can brew your kvass slightly sweet. And we're definitely going to talk about the sweet because we do want to ferment it so a lot of the sugar is left. We're left with your organic acids. One of the brews that I brought tonight, my dark bread beer, is pretty much non-sweet. Tastes like a Guinness almost. Malcolm and I are going to indulge in that here in the second half. One really amazing benefit. So, I don't drink much alcohol myself, but they do use it for people addicted to alcohol to reduce cravings. Because it really does, and I'm excited to share this with the guys here, but it really does give you that beer-like flavor and feels like you're drinking beer. So also with that fermentation process, we're going to get a large number of B vitamins, like I said. So the B9 goes through the roof. We get a B12 increase. You're going to get the synergy of B vitamins increasing. We have a significant amount of vitamin C as well in there. One thing that most of these fermented drinks do, because of the organic acid content, is reduce the risk of stone formations in the bile ducts and bladder. So we can think of these organic acids as solvents for the body. So they're going to dissolve and keep the system clear, right? That's so important. We want to avoid calcification. We want to avoid these problems bugging up our system. So something like kvass, you'll get the same from kombucha or jun. Pardon me, as long as you let it, I'm just going to grab some water here. As long as you let it ferment fully, you're going to get a good organic acid production. Good organic acid production in there. And those organic acids are extremely healing for the body. Like I said, solvents in the body. So for the cholesterol, the plaque, and for the stone formation. I'm just going to throw this down here. Now, one thing in the literature that they often recommend kvass for is chronic fatigue. So I find that interesting. So it's a very invigorating tonic. I do not find it stimulating, invigorating in terms of B vitamins, but I have drank it before bed before, no problems keeping me awake. To each their own. So if you're new to it, if you're really sensitive to B vitamins, you might want to try it earlier in the day, see if it kind of peps you up a little bit. But I don't find that because, just for me, more robust to it maybe. But also it's noted here, and you'll see here, but promotes a better sleep or falling asleep faster. So, take that with a grain of salt. Every body is different, but still something to experiment with. Now, it has been noted in situations of depression, again, to each their own, but hey, anything we can get, especially at a time like this in our day and age, when we can alleviate depression and get something that's feel good in the diet, I say go for it. So try it out for that. You'll find often recommended to clear the skin, improve the appearance, reduce and remove inflammation of the skin. They'll use it in, I think it's called purulent acne. So things like boils and cysts, things that need to be drained. We're drinking that. I even believe they will apply it topically as well. Another thing you'll see common reference to is cases of eye disease. So positive effects for diseases of the eye, like glaucoma, cataracts, things of that nature. And as I mentioned before, and I think this is the most important aspect of kvass and fermented foods in general, we need it now more than ever in our culture, but is a prophylactic against harmful viruses and infections. We need to keep boosting that bacteria up in our system. Most people aren't aware that the lactobacillus in our system has about a 3-day live time. So every 3 days, we're wanting to actually restore and renew our gut microbiome. You'll see people, and this might be yourself as well, taking probiotics or eating these foods and radically changing your health, only to find that you'll slip back into a state of, imbalance or dysbiosis. This is a constant thing that we have to keep up. This is a lifestyle, right? And I think this is what's important about this whole fermentation festival and sharing and culturing the community, getting this out there, because we need to embrace this lifestyle. and really have these things ongoing and going forward. So remember that 3 days, you can do a mental check-in with yourself. Hey, have I had something fermented, a live fermented food in the last 3 days? No? Then call up Denis and he'll be happy to come over and feed you full of whatever your heart's desired. Now, but I thought wheat was bad for you, Malcolm. I thought wheat was bad for you. And I wasn't sure too about the turnout that I would get tonight, because when people hear bread in our culture, we're scared of it, right? It's this phobia about wheat and grains, and there is research on both sides of the equation. I'll give it that, but I'm here to promote being easy and gentle, being fluid in life, right? I don't believe in hard lefts, hard rights. Somewhere in the middle, I find, is always the truth. So when it comes to wheat, there's going to be a time and a place where it maybe doesn't work for you, but I thought it was bad for you. It is not bad for you. Wheat is one of the best foods that we have access to being in our local environment. So we're going to go over a little bit about eating wheat in general, because I knew I'd get questions about this. I don't know if there's any questions so far, or it's fairly silent on the
I think people are like stunned. Like, so Dana says, wowza, sounds like the miracle drink.
The miracle drink. You know what? I love it. I love it so much more. And I've brewed kombucha for years and years, and Jun for years. And I'm kind of known for the long fermentation of kombucha. I still have kombucha that was brewed over 5 years ago, and I'll crack it open. I've kind of, in my mind, perfected that so I can ferment things for a long period of time. I'm newer to the traditional Kvas world, for sure. Did it years ago, didn't bake at the time. Now that I'm back into sourdough, I'm like, starting to research and read about it and rediscovering it. Phenomenal. Now you don't get, and I'll go back quickly. One thing I do want to point out that I forgot, when we're talking about the bacteria and the species that you'll get in a sourdough starter, the one thing that you're not going to get that you will in the kombucha or the Jun is the genus Acetobacter. So Acetobacter is responsible for really driving down that pH. So I'm sure there's people, and you can light up the comments if this has happened to you, if you've brewed kombucha or Jun and it's become vinegar, so acidic you can't even drink it almost. And this is due to Acetobacter. Now that is healthy, and it's good to have the rich source of organic acids in the body. But one thing I like about Kvas is it doesn't get that crazy low of a pH. It is got acids in it. It is a lower pH, but not nearly like you can get with the kombucha, for example. So it's got me really pumped because it seems to be easier and more robust. You don't have to baby it as much. And it's so quick. You can brew this within 5 days, 7 days, which I'll get into, and I'm jumping ahead, but so quick to do, where kombucha is a little bit more of a lag time. The kombucha SCOBY, and I'm not trying to slag on kombucha either because it's amazing, but the kombucha SCOBY, you really have to baby, I find. Your symbiosis of bacteria and yeast can get out of balance. You can be brewing kombucha that's not fizzy at all, or some that's way too fizzy, and that's all to do with the balance of the bacteria and yeast. With Kvas and the raw sourdough starter, it is so much more robust in my experience. So easy. I'm in love. So anyway, back to eating wheat and whole grains in general. Just want to go over a little bit of research, a little bit of data to kind of back up the case of why it's not the evil food that people make it out to be. So we see studies from the University of Utah have found evidence that in the teeth of humans as far back as 3.4 million years ago, glutinous grasses, now relatives of wheat and oats and these things. So it means that our genetics are not the 10,000 years that we've been told from the Neolithic era where we were starting to farm. And it's true that we did start to farm. The agricultural revolution, we started making these grains and eating them for sure. But we have evidence of ancient hominids 3.4 million years ago consuming these. And when you think about it, it makes perfect sense. If you were a real hunter and gatherer, you're going to be gathering a lot more than you're going to be hunting. You're going to eat whatever food you can get your hands on, right? And these grasses were available. Easy. They didn't run away from you. You could pick them, eat them, get nutrition. We find from that same research paper, again, University of Utah, that hunting only dates back about 500,000 years. So the whole premise of that paper is that they're surmising that we're actually designed to digest grain better than we are meat. Now, I'm not here to debate. I'm just sharing because I do think grains and wheat get a bad rap. It's all about honoring that food, treating it like it should be. And one of these ways is through the act of fermentation, but they're sprouting and soaking, and we'll get into more of that. An interesting stat that I pulled from the Journal of Agriculture and Food Chemistry, the average American ate 86 pounds more wheat flour in the year 1900 than they did in 2008. 86 pounds more wheat flour in 1900 than 2008. That's pretty crazy. Now, this is suggesting that that explosion we've seen of this gluten sensitivity may not be due to the gluten itself. There's maybe something else going on, and this isn't a class on gluten. We can maybe do a talk on gluten, but some food for thought at least. Now, when we look at the ancient Kamut wheat, the beautiful yellow wheat variety, even though it is a different type of gluten, we're going to talk about it in a second, but it shows twice as much gluten. It's usually the genome A and B, but twice as much gluten and reduced inflammation twofold compared to modern wheat, reduced lower cholesterol, blood sugar, yet it's got 2 times the gluten of our modern wheat. Granted, different type of wheat, but still some food for thought. Now, wheat is a powerful prebiotic for the gut. I was trying to find this stat again. I've read it before, and I didn't put it in here, so I'm just going to verbally tell you, but I've read that consuming wheat actually creates a 40% enhancement in the microbiotic diversity of your intestines compared to non-wheat eaters. So you get a 40% greater diversity of bacteria just by consuming wheat. So when we see eating whole wheat foods, and this is again a research paper, eating whole wheat foods can increase the microbiome, lactobacillus count, and Bacteroides colonies while reducing Clostridium colonies, which are one group of bad bacteria that is known for the inflammatory gut condition known as IBS. Equals not fun, right? So eating whole wheat is a little bit counterintuitive than what we've been told in our modern health food world. Now, again, I will say as a side note, this might be something you need to work up to and get your system back into balance to be able to digest gluten if it's not working for you right now. But just so you know, there is hope. There's hope. There's always hope, right? Hold the faith.
And Donna is making a comment. I'm sure you've heard this before. She's has read research suggesting that it's the glyphosates, the pesticides, that are likely causing the digestive issues. And I'm sure you've heard the anecdotal stories of, well, I go to Europe and they're consuming ancient grains, less.
It's true. Yeah. And it's exactly right. So we actually find that there's a specific enzyme. I didn't put it in this presentation, but a specific enzyme in the system that breaks down gluten. That specific enzyme is killed off by antibiotics, by things like glyphosate, by pesticides, and heavy metals, specifically mercury. So really, we're living in this cocktail soup of toxins in our modern day. So we're actually killed out the enzyme, the bacteria that creates the enzyme, to digest things like gluten. Now, the interesting, I don't know if this would be an irony, but the interesting thing is if we consume whole grain wheat, part of the bran of that wheat will actually feed the exact microbiome or the exact microbe, in our system that will create this enzyme again. So I don't know if this is you. You can tell me in the comments, type it down below. But if you've ever reduced wheat out of your diet for a period of time and then tried to reintroduce it, and it's even worse than it was before when you try to bring it back. It's a really interesting phenomenon. It's that the food actually feeds the system to be able to digest the food in the first place. So I don't know if anyone else has experienced that out there, but some interesting studies on a gluten-free diet is we actually find people on a gluten-free diet have significantly less beneficial gut bacteria and more harmful gut bacteria than people that don't, which is really interesting. We also find that people who eat wheat specifically increase their activity of NK and T killer cells in the body. These are critical cells for our immune system. Now, when we digest things that when we eat things, that are hard to digest, and specifically with wheat, we find that it actually stimulates the intestinal wall to create a better microbiome, a better balance, and actually give us a stronger immune system. So who would have known that eating wheat actually makes your immune system stronger? right? If you look at it and think about it, 80% of our immune system is in our digestive system. So anything we can do to help that is going to help our overall immune system. There was also something I want to get, well, I can go ahead to it. No, I'll wait. I'll say this part first, is people on a gluten-free diet had about 4 times the amount of mercury in their blood than people who ate wheat. So really interesting. Now, you could argue this a lot of different ways, like what kind of gluten-free diet were they on? Let's face it, there's a lot of products that have hit the market that just primarily advertise gluten-free, so people will buy it. Doesn't mean that's good quality food, but what the hypothesis is behind this is that the gluten-free diet causing a lack in our immune system, a decrease in our overall immune system, and it compromises the body's ability to detox, not digest, detox mercury efficiently. Right? So we've lowered our immune system, we've lowered our microbiome. We now cannot detoxify heavy metals as well. All to do with eating specifically wheat. Pretty crazy. So we also found some research out of the University of Naples that showed a group that ate whole wheat foods significantly reduced inflammation within the gut. Now, this was measured by several factors, but tumor necrosis factor alpha, interleukin 10. They also found reduced arterial inflammation in general. So that was due to a reduced, I have it down here, plasminogen activator inhibitor 1. So overall, it's a little bit counterintuitive, but yet it makes sense. We're eating things that are tough to digest that make us tougher. They make us stronger. Now, this whole digesting wheat is to do with whole grains, not even when we're fermenting it for a second round in Kvas, which is what makes Kvas like eating wheat and sourdough on steroids. It's a further enhancement of that whole gamut, that whole system. Now, how are we doing for time? Got a little bit, couple more slides to go, and then we're going to do some hands-on. But the specific elements for brewing Kvas, super simple. First one, sourdough bread. Now, you don't have to be a baker, like I said. Any cereal grain bread will work. To give a proper fermentation balance, though, you do want to rely on the grains initially that are higher in maltose. Those are going to be rye, wheat, barley, cornmeal. Yes, they do make a traditional cornmeal Kvas, which is like a light beer. Fantastic. Kamut, spelt, on and on and on. Basically, those traditional grains that you can think of for baking bread are going to have some maltose content. Now, yes, white bread alone can be used, even though it is not high naturally in maltose. And this is what's interesting about the symbiotic culture here is this culture will go into the matrix and realize, hey, this white flour doesn't have any maltose. So they'll start splitting the starch apart, right? Making these double bonded glucose molecules called maltose. Now, when I'm asked about baking bread, sourdough bread, I do always promote people using whole grains in their bread, but specifically, at certain ratios. Now, whole grains will give a deeper, complex flavor. They're just going to give a heartier bread, which I personally like. Not everybody likes that. But the depth and complexity you can get from a long bulk ferment, especially if you ferment overnight or even like a 24-hour in the fridge. I usually do about a 12-hour in the fridge. But those long fermentations, when you're using a higher whole grain ratio or component of your flour for your bread, you're just going to get this nice depth of flavor that it's just remarkable. It's become a ritual in our household. When the bread comes out of the oven, we sit around, slice it up, and consume it. I'll let it sit for an hour, let it age, let the starch, do its thing, so we don't cut it hot usually. But there is nothing like that fresh slice of bread, and it's something so simple and so beautiful that's been lost in our culture, where we're just going to the store and buying a loaf of bread. I can tell you, there is something so magical about bread in general. You can live and survive off bread due to the protein content and the vitamin mineral content. Magical. So
that's where that word comes from. Company, hey, or a companion or companionship. It literally means those who share bread together.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful.
Companion.
It's become one of these things too, like I said, in our house that we'll literally gather as a family, slice the bread, enjoy it when it's fresh. I don't anymore even put butter or anything on it. I'm just letting those flavors go in my mouth, just chewing it well, letting the enzymes interact. The complexity of flavor is remarkable. So I can't stress enough how much I suggest you get into trying to bake your own bread. So rewarding, so amazing. So I recommend at least usually a 50-50. So we're going to use like a 50% whole grain to a 50% all-purpose flour. But you can go up to a 70-30, 80-20. The higher you are with your whole grain flour, so you can even do 100% whole grain bread, but the higher you are, the harder it is going to be to bake. You're not going to get the oven spring that you're looking for usually. So start off usually with a 50-50 and kind of work from there is what I recommend to people. When you use whole grain flour as well, you do need to adjust water, fermentation time accordingly. Things like rye will help your fermentation go even quicker. So, like it said, it's an art form. Again, this isn't a baking bread class or how to bake bread, but experiment and get out there and see what works for you. Now, I'm a huge fan of heritage grains for baking. They are more difficult to bake with, I find. Heritage grains are older grains, heirloom grains, some people call them, but you'll find actually different kinds of gluten in these grains, specifically gluten related to 3 different genomes, genome A, B, and D. We find that the modern wheat has usually a higher genome D. Now, and that's the gluten that seems to affect people. As a side note, research shows that only 0.5 to 1% of our population are true celiacs. It's pretty low, yet it's become a $16 billion industry. Most are trendy, right? Get on the, and that's okay, right? Because we've all been through also our road to healing. And so if you're at a place where you can't digest it, that's okay, right? It's about getting that microbiome, that system back in balance, robust and strong again, that you can digest nuts and bolts if you had to, right? That's what we want. We want that strong agni, that strong digestive center. But getting back to the genomes, when we use these heritage wheats and grains, they're going to be weaker for baking, but still I advocate using them. We find things like einkorn will be only genome A. Spelt is like an A and B, for example. And some even the modern wheats aren't that bad. Like they're usually from older species. So my father-in-law grew a species, which I have as this starter tonight, from the 60s, and it's going to have some genome D in it, but this flour in this grain, this wheat is phenomenal. So, as long as you want to go and I'm going to say something that I only advocate organic grains because of the glyphosate, the pesticides, and usually the organic grains, especially if you go, and I think Sherry mentioned some sources before, but they're going to be just better quality in general. And they're usually going to be from these older varieties, 60s, 70s, even 80s, right? When we get newer than that, these hard red spring wheats and that are so hybridized to have genome D gluten that, they bake fantastic bread and they're like cement with gluten, but not the easiest to digest if you're sensitive to gluten. Now, having said that, the fermentation process is going to help immensely. In the last class, we talked a lot about it, but it's going to help immensely with breaking down this gluten, right? Creating the enzyme you need to digest gluten better. One, I don't know if I want to call it pro tip, but one tip for people, if you're getting into bread baking and you're sensitive to gluten, I suggest slightly overproofing your bread. You're not going to get the oven spring out of your bread. So the shape that you maybe want, it might lay a little bit flatter, but the digestibility of it is amazing. So in about a 6-hour bulk ferment is what I'll bake my bread at before I put it in the fridge for, 9 to 12 hours, let's say. If I'm going to bulk ferment for 7 hours, big difference. If you went up to like 12 hours with a really aggressive starter, that bread's going to be loose and slack, and it's not going to shape well. It's not going to rise, but it's going to be very digestible. So there's no real failures when we're baking bread. So anyway, the first element is the sourdough bread. So important part, but any bread will work. Second element, and I'm going to speed through these here. Second element, sourdough starter. Starter management is key, not only for producing great bread, but for brewing great Kvas. Now, Kvas is more liberal or robust to your age of your starter and the stage of your starter, where bread, I find, is not. Usually, we're going to want to use something called a levain in my bread baking methods. So also called a leaven, levain. I have it here. Sorry, I should be using the pointer. But we're going to want to use something that's, peak performance. If you have your phone at home, you might want to take a picture of this page or any of the slides in general, so you'll kind of know. You can see the mouse? Yeah, well, they might want to take a picture just to keep it at home because I'm going to speed through this, but This has got some ratios for the proper levain, the proper starter feed on it. I usually feed my starter at a 1 to 5 to 5, which would be 10 parts starter to 5 parts wheat flour or whatever flour I'm using to water. And then I'm going to take some of that the day I bake. So you'll look here. I can just quickly go over my routine for baking. Now, I do put my starter in a fridge for most of the days of the week. I have it down to where it's super easy. Like this is the easiest ferment I've ever had to take care of. I've trained this starter over 3 years. It doesn't even take that long, but if you're always feeding it and reproducing it at its peak, which is about 5 to 6 hours after you feed the levain, or about 8 to 10 hours after you do a starter feed at 1 to 5 to 5, if you keep taking that peak performance of that starter and just refeeding it day after day for a few weeks even, you can train it that you can keep it in the fridge. I'll take it out on a Wednesday or even a Thursday, Friday being my bread baking day. I'll feed it Thursday night. You can see it right here, 10 grams, 1 to 5 to 5. Friday morning, I'll create a levain that I'll use to bake my bread. It's at a 1 to 2 to 2. I know this is going fast for people, so take a picture of this. You can read over it later, but 5 to 6 hours later, I'm going to get a hugely active triple volume starter. It's going to have what I call a domed appearance. So you'll see actually a convex dome on the top. That's when you know it's super aggressive and super peak time to get your bread started. I'll take some of that at that time and start another starter round, putting it back in the fridge, and a little bit also to do my Kvas at that time, just to give it a super aggressive jump on your whole brewing. But again, for sake of time, and maybe if there's questions after, we'll go back over this. Last element of brewing Kvas is the sweetener and the flavors. So you don't have to put any flavor in it, but you definitely do have to put some sort of sweetener in it. There's going to be the maltose and sugars that are present in the bread, but you also need to add a secondary source. Can be anything you like. Can be cane sugar, can be honey, can be coconut sugar, can be molasses, maple syrup, malt, dried fruit, anything that you have at your disposal in your imagination, go for it. Some flavors that I love are raisins. They're kind of a traditional one. The Boris Kvas, like we were talking about, it's the raisins and the lemon. That's a traditional Kvas recipe. I had some lemon. We had a miscommunication at my house, and that lemon disappeared at supper time tonight. So we are not going to use lemon, but I did bring some hops. So I love hops. I love the bitterness from hops, but if you do hops in a clear, I'm going to stand now. If you do hops in a clear bottle, you're going to get a reaction with the ultraviolet light in your surroundings, and it's going to give you a slight skunkiness like you get from cannabis, which I love. Not everybody likes the skunkiness, but I think it's fantastic. But mint, fruit, anything that you can think of is going to do well. And I think there's one last slide here. This is the overall how to brew Kvas. Now, the recipe that we have on the PDF, you sending it out tomorrow, Malcolm? It's already out. That is for, I think it's a 2-liter batch or a 3-liter batch. This one right here, this slide is for a 1-liter batch. And I actually find, I did the recipe proportions for a bigger batch. Start with the 1 liter. So this is bread tea we're going to make tonight. Start with the 1 liter because usually you only have a little bit of bread ends around. You can experiment, get it down. You can be, within 4 weeks' time, you'll have 4 different batches going and only stuck with a liter. So if there's something you don't like, something you do like, you can do it again. Just easy, robust, foolproof. And I think that is it now to brew some Kvas. And we're going to do it quick. We still have some time. People are going to stick with us, I hope.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. See, I told you this was going to be amazing. What a deep dive.
Speaking fast here. So
for sure. No, it's amazing.
So super easy. So having said all that, all the research, and like I always say, do your own research, right? Start to look this stuff up. Get into, oh, I got to take off the screen share, right? Yeah, you got it? Okay, awesome. Start to do the research, look it up for yourself, kind of see what you like. There's lots of recipes online, but be easy about it. You don't have to be so standard and following something exact. You'll see that the proportions when you're actually in the real world example don't always match up. So what we're going to do, I'm going to start with, and again, when you look at that slide, that last slide, if you took a picture of it, the recipe looks overwhelming because it's a big, long thing. Really, again, it's so easy. First thing we're going to do. Now, I can't stress enough how important it is to get a baker scale or a scale in general. You never want to use volume when you're baking or fermenting. I think grams are always, right? Mass is constant. Some things you can judge with volume, like the sweetener and that type of thing, a little bit of the water. But you do want to get a scale because it just makes it so much easier. So what we're going to do, I'm just going to see if this is still hot. I'm going to maybe turn that on. If it gets too loud, we're going to shut it off. But we want to take a fermentation vessel. I'm going to start with a 2-liter jar, mason jar. You can do a big batch, small batch, but usually this will give you enough room that you can get it going. First stage I'm going to show you. Now this is through the magic of television. I'm going to show you this in quick stages because we don't have time to ferment it all. But you like that? Yeah, we got a little magic happening tonight. So this is a mix of bread. This is 100% rye pumpernickel sourdough. This is actually a rye bread that I got from Paris, France, through the Pointland Bakery. I know it's pretty crazy, but you can actually get sourdough overnighted to you by courier right from Paris, France. So my wife's birthday, we woke up to some fresh sourdough from Paris. It's pretty sweet. I was a hero. I was a hero that night. And some of this I baked myself. One of these in here is a blend I like to do, which it's a hard red wheat, but I use some rye in it, but also some black barley. I love black barley in my bread. It gives a real softness and depth to it. It's an heirloom barley. Fantastic. Comes from BC. But anyway, I'll stop romanticizing the bread here, but we'll get it in there. But we just want to fill up our jar. We can break these pieces up. We don't have to. You know, you'll see online, it's cutting it in. Now, what I've done to this bread is I've let it dry out. So you let it dry on a rack, keep it out, and then you want to toast it. Now, you can use your toaster and just do several rounds. The easiest is probably cookie sheet, 325, 350 for anywhere from, depending on your oven, about 10 to 30 minutes. And you just want to toast it. You essentially want to make croutons, okay, if you know what I mean by that. So you want to toast cubes of bread. So we're going to take it like that. I'm just going to go with that water for sake of time. But we want to cover this with boiling water. We're going to tear the scale. Now, this is where it gets interesting and non-standard when you're following a recipe, is I'm going to add this water. I'm going to put in, so you put it at 0. I'm going to put in 1 liter, so 1,000 grams of water. I'm going to let this brew and make my bread tea. I'll just watch the scale here. Almost there, 1,000 grams. Doesn't have to be exact. Perfect.
All right, Derek, there's a request.
Sure.
Website for how you get your sourdough overnighted from France.
Oh, Pointland Bakery. So Poilane. So if you just type in Pointland Bakery, you'll get it. You can do it. It's not like it's pricey, so it's not like an everyday thing, but they do have like a club where you can actually sign up. If Malcolm's laughing at me, you can actually sign up and get it delivered weekly on their like mailing list, and they're gonna FedEx it to you right to your door, and you're gonna be a hero with your friends. But on a serious note, we just did it for fun. I bake bread, but hey, it's kind of nice once in a while. So we're gonna let this sit here. Now I'm gonna let this bread tea steep for anywhere from 3 to 8 hours. You can go overnight. I find after a certain amount of time, the bread's just gonna go to mush, and that's okay, and you can definitely do that. It's just gonna make the filtering process and the straining process just a little bit more tedious. And I'll also find after about a few hours, this is gonna soak up this water into the bread. So I'll just wanna come back and I'll maybe put another 200 grams of water on top, or just to cover the bread. I can even see here it's some sticking out, so we're going to use a spoon and just push it. Now, you can use like a pickle pebble or something like that, but after this has been sitting in boiling water for a few hours, it's just going to disintegrate and your pickle pebble is going to fall. So I haven't figured out a really good foolproof method for this yet, but we're going to let this brew. Now, what we're doing is we're extracting the flavors, we're extracting the maltose, we're getting all that toasted goodness, right? We're getting all those elements into our bread tea. So we're going to put a loose fitting lid on, and we're going to set that aside. And you just want to be careful at home you don't touch it because it's boiling water, right? We're going to let that brew. Now, fast forward, where we've let that brew, we now have our filtered bread tea. Okay, this is using 100% rye, and we can see how dark that is. Nothing has been added to that. That's some dark ale, right? It's that dark bread tea. Now, one tip I should say too about the bread tea is you can use a nut milk bag to strain this out, and you're just going to want to kind of milk it out and squeeze it. You're going to get to a point though where the starches and the flours are going to come through even your nut milk bag, and you're going to get left, and I don't know if this will show up on camera, if you can zoom in there, a lovely camera guy, you'll get some sediment, right? That's from maybe over straining it. Now we can get rid of this by using automatic siphon, right? Racking it, I think is the proper term. So we don't have that. But still, I find that a light sieve, squishing it out, getting as much water as you can before it starts to turn to this milky starch flour water, then just kind of composting that bread, filling it up with water. So you'll see here, I did the same thing there, and we lost about, this is 700 mils. So we lost about 300 mils. Actually, we lost about 500 because I put another 200 on. In my bread, I lost about 500 mils of water, but that's okay because I'm going to water this down now with the second step here. And this is what I find is easiest. We're going to take, actually, I'm going to move this over so people can see. We're going to take our fermentation vessel, again, another 2-liter jar. We're going to put it here. What I'm going to do, and I think this boiled, I heard it. We're going to dissolve our sweetener in the hot water because it's just easier to mix that way, right? The sugar or the honey. So we're going to put it like this. Now I do have a measuring cup. So on the 1-liter batch, it's anywhere from 1/4 cup to 1/3 of a cup. It just depends how sweet you like it. And again, you're wanting to ferment the sugar down to almost nothing. Eventually the sugar is going to turn into gluconic acid. So you're going to have a slight sweetness, not very sweet. That's when you know the sugar is gone. You're just retaining that gluconic acid before it turns something more acidic, meaning that it's healthy at that point if you're trying to avoid a lot of sugar in the diet. This is actually, I'm going to put a little bit more because I plan to take this home, brew this, and then celebrate with these guys in about a week. So we'll put this in there. We're just going to put that right in there, that sugar. We're going to tear the scale. Now I know to brew a liter, I said this is 700 mils. I need about another 300 mils.
So question, can you use molasses for the sweetener?
Fantastic question. And that's what this is. And I'll go quickly over some recipes at the end. This is molasses. This is maple syrup. So this is my dark, my amber, and my light. All right. I was thinking. But this is molasses. This is maple syrup. And this is cane sugar with a little bit of coconut sugar. So again, it's up to you, but definitely molasses. The only pro tip I have with molasses is it goes crazy for fermentation and will ferment really quick. So you're going to have to shorten your fermentation time down. So next step, we're going to put 300 grams of this hot water. And remember, the 300 grams is going to bring us up to a full, there we go, 314, close enough, right? Put it back on there. Now, I brought cane sugar tonight too because it'll dissolve super easy. We won't really have to even mix it. We'll just swirl it. It'll be good. Almost done. And we can shake it after too, but we'll swirl it, dissolved pretty much. I'm like the chemist, right? Swirling this up. Okay, so now what we're going to want to do is we'll take our bread tea, our sieved bread tea, strained bread tea, and we're going to add this straight to this. Now we're going to have, look at perfect final volume of 1,000 mils, right? So 1 liter. Now by doing this and using that hot water, mixing it with that room temperature cool water, this is going to bring down the temperature of the water. It's going to usually, I didn't bring a thermometer, like a probe thermometer, but it's usually going to be under 110. Usually, I should say it's actually under 90 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's not going to kill your starter. And that's the only thing you want to be aware of. You don't want to add the starter to it when it's super hot. So to cool it down a little bit more, what we're going to do is we're going to put a little raisins in there. Now raisins, in the traditional Boris Kvas too, or the traditional Kvas recipes, they'll use raisins. The other benefit of raisins, or 2 benefits of raisins, are going to give you, or 3 benefits of raisins, some extra sweetness, some depth of flavor, some extra yeast, but also once the raisins float, all the raisins float, we know that this is now ready to bottle. It's fermented enough. And I'm just going to use a handful. We're just going to go with Derek measurements here.
Raisin a little fermentation.
Yeah, getting it done with the raisins in there. And then, yeah, like I said, we can keep our eye. When those raise up, we're good. Now we're going to hop this a little bit. So we're going to put some hops in there. Now, you could have brewed this as a tea ahead of time in that hot sugar water. And it's often what I'll do. And then I'll strain that out. So I have hops tea, but we're just going to go with the full hops in there. And you can overdo hops, but I'm going to put that's about a tablespoon, give or take. And actually, I'm going to see if I can stir this in a little bit. And now we just want to add our starter. Hopefully that's not too hot. Nope, feels pretty good. We're going to take a starter. Now, again, you could do a starter at any stage. Peak fermentation or peak starter life stage is probably going to be your best for enhanced probiotic and fermentation. So if you want the most nutrients, use a peak starter. But this is a starter that I didn't feed. It was dormant in my fridge. And I could even throw this in there if I wanted to, and you're still going to get a nice fermented, balanced Kvas, which you won't get if you use just bread, or if you won't get it if you just use that in baking your bread. So this is only about a teaspoon of starter. Put that in there. And really that's it. We're going to let this will be a clump at the beginning depending on the age of your starter, but we can just kind of mash it up. If I had a longer spoon, I have the fairy spoons here that are tiny. And we're just going to stir it up. And now what we want to do is we want to put a loose fitting lid or cheesecloth or something over it. I'm just going to use a loose fitting lid, just like a quarter turn, half turn, just so it stays on. There we go. And we're going to put that somewhere and let that ferment. Now we're going to keep our eye on it. In about 16 hours or even less, sometimes 8, we'll start to see fine bubbles form. In about 2 to 3 days, that's going to be ready to bottle. The only other pro tip I have about brewing Kvas is we want to make sure that we're burping it once we bottle it, because it gets insanely fizzy and can be dangerous. It's one of the only ferments that I'm cautious with, other than when you brew kombucha with raspberry. For some reason, when you use raspberry and within brewing your kombucha, it'll go nuts. So that's the only other thing, just to remember to gas this. So 2 to 3 days, we're going to bottle this. We can keep this bottle out for another day, and then we're going to keep it in the fridge, burp it maybe once or twice over the next week. Then it should be ready to drink. So in about a week's time, you can start drinking it. This one right here, this light guy, I brewed that bottle date October 19th, so exactly 1 month. So you'll read on the internet, they say it lasts for a week, 3 weeks in the fridge, something like that, like a low amount of time. I find you get a lot longer out of it than you'll read on the net. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to taste some. So hopefully this won't be too fermented because it hasn't been in the fridge. So we're going to try. I have this one that's gassed.
All right, Denis, how's Facebook? Any questions, anything like that coming through?
Whoa, that's going to be crazy. I'll try this one.
Quite active?
Yes, they haven't been sitting in the fridge, so this is what I mean. They're going to be quite bubbly.
Yeah, all right.
Uh-oh. I always think back to last year, was it? You had that huge explosion.
Oh, yeah.
I love it. It's the best footage ever. Malcolm just blows the top.
Yeah, I think it's at least once a year I have an explosion happen with some sort of fermented beverage.
So I haven't tasted these in a little bit now. So I'm interested to see. But last time I did this exact batch, we still needed some time to ferment. Still had some sweetness. We'll see what it has now.
So I love this approach to kind of your dark, your medium, your light. And that, again, just to clarify, that's coming from the type of bread you're using and then the type of sweetener.
Exactly, yeah. And mostly from the bread.
Mostly from the bread.
Mostly from the bread, although the molasses will give it a dark.
Right, because as you mentioned, when you showed us that bread beer from that sourdough pumpernickel, it was quite dark.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly. So dark here. So we'll go have a taste here.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right. Can you use an
absolutely.
airlock
Yeah. And
in
you know what?
that primary fermentation? And then, yeah, stoppers, release the gas in your primary fermentation. I mean, you've essentially just got this open to the air, but really that carbonation is building up in a secondary ferment.
Exactly.
So that's
So
where
you definitely can use an airlock.
Yeah.
I didn't bring it. I sometimes do use an airlock, but I've kind of found that it's just easy to do it this way.
Right.
Leave it a little open gassing. It's so fizzy and so active, as you can see, that you don't really need to keep in any gas. Just like Malcolm said, when you bottle it, you're going to build up so much nice carbonation if that's what you like. And if not, you just keep it gassing more or keep an airlock on it. Not everybody likes things super fizzy. I like things uber fizzy. So for
Right.
me, this is what I like. But yeah, definitely an airlock works.
Yeah.
So that's yours, Malcolm.
And
Which one
if
is
you're
mine?
after boozy, I know that the carbon dioxide drives it into the system.
Yeah, there you go. A little bit faster.
Yeah.
So we're going to cheers here.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers.
Okay. First time trying the bread beer.
Yeah, this is the light bread beer. This is a 1 month old.
Wow. Okay. I mean, definitely you can smell that.
Yeah.
Like the maltiness
Yeah,
of it.
totally. Smells.
Yeah.
I better give that a try too.
So this is the light one, right? Anybody else?
Wow. Unbelievable. That's amazing, actually. Yeah.
It's not acidic like kombucha is.
No, it's not acidic.
Like, it's
and
beer-like.
I love the maltiness of that, actually. That is really good.
Complex, slightly sweet.
Yeah. Way more
Slightly
complex.
sweet.
Yeah.
I'm going to gas this one. If we got a little bit of time, we'll try the next few. Yeah.
Woo. This is kind of like citrusy, too.
Mhm.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Next question.
One question was, do you think grapefruit would be a good flavor? That's a question from Ashley.
Oh.
I think it'd be fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. So what about grapefruit as a flavor? Yeah, I think so. So you could either do juice or rind. And of course, certain types of hops, they tend to lend that grapefruit-like flavor. So you could actually choose it based upon hop variety or even literally add the grapefruit
So where's
in.
your cup? Here you go.
Oh, yeah. I got to finish this off. Ready, next round.
So I gassed this one last night, so I would be able to open it. This one had me giggling like a...
It smells a lot more like a beer.
It smells like a beer. So this is a maple syrup, rye. I have the recipes written down here and I can go over them, but
Definitely
some
like
raisins.
more yeast notes too.
Yeah, so this definitely smells like a beer, like a craft beer.
Wow. Yeah, it tastes a little bit more like a beer. I could definitely get the maple flavor in there for sure.
Right? Totally. And you could let it ferment longer so the sweetness is gone, and you'll find that on the last one here.
It's unbelievable how yummy that is.
It is.
So beer-like,
Wow.
eh? So beer-like. So
Yeah.
there's some hops in here as well, and you'll get that
Oh,
hops,
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
that cannabis skunky, that citrusy from hops.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thick. So see how it's thick, nourishing like a ale would be.
Wow.
Taste yeasty as like a beer would taste yeasty.
But not overly. I know sometimes you create a ferment and that's like a dominant note of like, that's kind of yeasty. This is not that at all. Like you can pick up those notes, but it's not. I wouldn't describe it as yeasty.
Well, this
One
might.
question on Facebook was, one question on Facebook there was, is it a good idea, Derek, to keep this in the dark while it's fermenting?
So when you're bottling it, if you bottled it, you should keep it in the fridge because it is so effervescent that it can be dangerous if left out. Like this on the counter, I just think if you avoid direct sunlight, you're going to be okay. So it doesn't have to be total darkness. Just somewhere that's kind of out of direct sunlight is probably your smartest bet. Once it's bottled, definitely take it out of sunlight, put it in the refrigerator. Thank you.
That looks super beautiful.
So this one should not be sweet at all. We'll see, but this is molasses. And then I spiked the bottle with a tiny bit of coconut sugar at the end.
Okay, well,
But
to your health.
if you smell it, you can smell the molasses.
To your health and to your wealth. So you can actually buy Kvas if you go to it's called the European Deli.
Let's see. No sweetness.
You have to
That's
buy
very
it from
stout-like.
the fridge. You can
Sorry.
buy Kvas, but you will find it only in the fridge if it's going to be the real probiotic stuff.
Exactly.
There's all this stuff on the shelves, and it will not be a living beverage.
Exactly.
And
Yep, probiotic. It's got to be, but so easy to make. Like, so you can buy it, but so easy to make. Then this would be if someone wanted no sweetness, wanted like a stout, like but not that crazy acidity. So if you're doing Jun or kombucha, usually when you get to this level of sweetness, which is none, you're going to have a really acidic, not that that's bad, but it's just, this is like, you can see even the viscosity of it.
Oh yeah.
Shiny, thick.
It tastes just like a Tootsie Roll.
Hmm.
If
Now
you
we
could
tasted
remember
them. We
those
should have probably
things.
went dark to light because the
Right.
sweetness factor, but still you can smell the molasses, taste it.
I would love to do this as like a dark licorice flavor.
Mhm,
Like anise, licorice, molasses. Yeah, play with that. And even orange in that as well.
Orange would be great. Yeah, some, or like even the grapefruit, but orange would be fantastic in that, in my opinion. So, oh, interesting. Yeah, I have not. I think you probably could, as long as it didn't affect the starter and the culture.
So the
You'll-
question is about using essential oils.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
oh, sorry. So the question about essential oils, I think it'd be worth trying. I haven't. I love wild orange, essential oil. That would be something you could try. Maybe a little bit of that in here, like you're saying, some orange or some citrus would be good.
Yeah, if you use the rind,
Rind,
especially
yeah.
like the zest, then you'd be able to get that, naturally.
Totally. Yeah. I think if you were going to use essential oil, a pro tip when you're using essential oils to help them disperse into a liquid medium better, because they're fat, they're hydrophobic, so they're scared of water. So if you just dripped essential oil in here, it's going to lie on the top. Is if you were to put your sugar in here, for example, or the hops, but some sort of mass, you can actually drop the essential oil on that sugar and then dissolve it. It'll actually disperse into micro droplets throughout the medium a lot better. It won't lie on the top.
For sure.
Eventually it will, but it'll just be better.
Yeah.
So it's something to try, but I don't have experience with that yet. Yeah, we got that one. I can see. Yeah, and I can say it again too. So do we want to keep it in the dark? Out of direct sunlight, doesn't have to be total darkness. Once it's bottled, definitely dark and definitely in the fridge. So I'm lucky enough that I have a fermentation fridge, so I can put it in there. But this is kind of the magic about brewing the 1 liter micro batches, is that, hey, you're only dealing with like a bottle or two at a time.
Yeah.
Not like a big batch that you have to kind of find spots for this. And because it's so quick, within a week or two, or like this one, a month in the fridge, you're going to be using that up. So pretty easy. Like, this is one of the easiest things and rewarding, right?
Oh, yeah.
Isn't that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Okay, we're noticing a theme, right?
yeah.
It's simple.
Yeah.
For
Simple,
sure.
easy,
Yeah.
recycling up old bread. So,
Okay, well, this has been fantastic. Do we have another question coming in, or? All right. And I got just seeing one here. Have you used citrus peels in the process? I know we talked a little bit about you could put it in that primary.
Yeah, totally. Have used citrus peels. Fantastic. Even the whole citrus I find is better. So the whole orange, the whole lemon, slicing that up and putting that in here, it's only sitting 2 or 3 days. If you put the peels alone, you're going to add to the bitterness of it, which is fine. Just let taste and flavor be your guide. And you'll know, like, after about 3 days is when I recommend, sorry, I should take that back. About a day, start tasting it up to 3 days and see where you like to capture it at before you bottle it, right? So just let taste be your guide. But I do recommend, in my experience, I find the whole fruit a bit better, or even dried fruit, whole dried fruit, better than just the peels. Yeah, great question.
Okay, so do you think you've got to kind of take it easy when you start with the Kvas? I know, for example, when some people start taking sauerkraut in the beginning, it can have explosive consequences that are quite unexpected. And
you know what, I that's actually a great point. So I do think probably you should slow and steady, like anything. Take it easy, because you're right, there's a lot of bacteria that's going to the system. From my slideshow, you saw that it actually helps you detox better, so that might translate into better bowel movements. Eating wheat in general will actually help your transit time. It's something like eating wheat, a little bit of whole wheat in your diet is like a 36% increase in your transit time, which is fantastic.
Very
So
interesting,
yeah, I think that's a great point. So slow and steady. You know, and again, like if you're doing the micro batches of a liter, right? This is nourishing. If you notice that, like that's filling just that little bit. So you're going to have like one glass. You could even replace like a snack with a glass of this, or having that, you know, a light supper and something like that is going to be good. But this micro batch is just easier to handle in general. So slow and steady, it wins the race.
What a fantastic example of how fermentation, for one thing, can take something that was going to go to the garbage. Like,
Yeah, beautiful.
I
Yeah.
won't lie. Like, I have been a proud dumpster diver since I was in university. I was jumping into the Planet Organic.
I
Rest in
remember
peace.
those days.
Rest in peace, the
Yeah.
dumpster. And
Yeah, yeah.
literally, without a doubt, every day in there was a garbage bag full of bread. And
Mhm. Waste.
if only I knew I could make something like beer out of that.
And something that's nourishing, that's even more nourishing than the bread
Mhm.
itself. You know, sourdough is extremely beneficial for us, but we're enhancing that by upgrading the B vitamins and everything. Actually, I'm going to show this because we're still going live. This is a good example of that water has been soaked up, so we can top that back up. But yeah, to your point, Denis, it's reusing something and enhancing it, making it
Mm.
better.
The aroma of this bread tea is
Right?
making my
Yeah,
mouth water.
it is.
Actually.
It's good. And again, like when people read about it, and that you hardly ever find anyone that makes this in our culture. So I'm trying to start the renaissance
La Renaissance.
to bring it back because it's so easy. And again, sounds weird, bread tea, but see, I've toasted it, so you can toast it to your likeness.
So let me ask, do you actually just sit down and enjoy a little bit of bread tea at all? Like, have you done that? Just
Yeah, I knew someone was gonna ask me that. No, not usually. Like I'll taste it, and
Right.
you're welcome to taste it, although the hops will be a little bit bitter in there. I usually, because I do micro batches, to be honest, I'm saving it for the final ferment, but I'll take like a swig or two. But
Well, what a great recipe. You know, it's truly a renaissance. The funny thing is, all of these recipes are so easy. When did we lose them? Well, the time is now to reclaim them and reclaim our power, take our health into our hands, our mugs and our bellies.
yeah.
Yeah, we're going to ferment the Rebellion. Get your new belly out.
Someone's had a little bit too much Kvas. No, just joking.
All right. Well, it's been another awesome, incredible evening. So thank you so much to Sherry Litfield and her incredible, simple sourdough skills from the start. And then Derek Fleming for the bread beer Kvas.
Thanks for tuning in, everybody.
Yeah, right on.
Thanks, everyone.